Hey friends, Christy here with Little Roots Ranch, and today we're going to talk all about bolting and the turkeys. We're going to talk about what is bolting, how you will know when a plant is bolting, why plants bolt, if they're still edible, plants most likely to bolt, and what can you do. And so, and then a few other small notes. But again, this video is all about bolting. So here in the Pacific Northwest, it is, well, it feels like it's early spring, but I guess it's kind of close to mid-spring, but the weather has been dark and gloomy, cold and wet. But nonetheless, I'm sitting here next to a bed of arugula, and as you can tell, or probably, it's going to seed. I don't know if you can see that there. And that's what all of these are. Some of the flowers have come out. And so what is bolting? First thing to understand is that bolting is a natural process for the plant, because even though we are growing plants to eat them and to enjoy them in salads or stir fries or however you prepare vegetables, the plants themselves are not thinking of us, and they're thinking about themselves, more specifically how they can continue their species. And how they do that is by growing, and then once they get to maturity, they go to seed, and so that way arugula can live on. Of course, here at the farm, I always have arugula seed, and I make sure that arugula always goes on. But the plant doesn't know that, and so it's just trying to do what it knows best to do, and that's going to seed. And so you might be asking, well, how will I know when something's going to seed? And especially if you're a first-time gardener or whatever, there's a lot of different ways. Sorry, my paper is blowing. There's a lot of different things that may not be so obvious, but bolting is one of those things where once you see it, you'll know it's happening. And the major indicator, or the first indicator, is that your plant is going to get a lot of height. And what I mean is the 6-inch arugula plant that was a 6-inch arugula plant has now tripled in size. And it's wild. Like, I think the best example of that would be collard greens. My collard green plants were like, I don't know, 2 feet high, maybe. And when they go to seed, they're like 6 or 7 feet high. And it's just like a big mass of yellow flowers. It's actually really beautiful, and I leave it because the bees love it. But so that's what you'll notice. Your plant that's usually, you know, kind of squat, and especially if it's like a green lettuce, something like that, you'll start to notice that all of a sudden it's that middle part is just growing up. And what that's creating is a stalk that then flowers will grow on. They look different depending on the plant, of course, but as a general thing, when you see that plant starting to grow straight up, and you might be tempted to think it's a long-awaited growth spurt, that's generally not the case. That's usually that it's going to seed, or, well, bolting is going to seed. It's just what everyone calls it. It's kind of because that flower stalk literally like bolts out. Like, you'll see your garden one day, and you'll come back the next, and it's like it's doubled in height, and you're like, that's bolting or going to seed. So why do plants bolt or go to seed? And the answer is a bunch of different reasons. The most obvious one is that they have reached maturity and that they wish to continue their growth cycle as annuals, and so they're going to get ready and produce seed, and either you'll have another crop if you just let it sit there, or more what they're preparing for is have the seeds sit in the soil over the winter and then germinate next spring. And that's how annuals continue to produce. There's also, if there's any kind of stress, like if your plant is dying, it will absolutely go to seed before it dies. If there's water stress, your plant is way likely to bolt. Or if there's high temperatures or big variations in temperature. both of those things will cause bolting. And so sometimes it's easy to pinpoint what it is, and sometimes it's not. Some plant, like arugula, for instance, pretty much after you seed it, it's got about like 8 to 10 weeks, and then generally it's going to go to seed. It's, there's a lot of the greens and like arugula, things like that, like they go to seed pretty quickly. And so you may be wondering, is it still edible? Yes and no. Yes, it's always edible, but it depends on, and even the flower stalks or the flowers are edible generally with almost every plant that's edible in general. But what happens is that the plant is now not in growing greens phase, vegetative stage, it's in reproductive stage. And so it takes all of its energy, its nutrients, its everything, develop that big flower stalk. And so what that does is it usually gives a harsher flavor to any leaves, like greens, lettuce, arugula, whatever, or like the stems become more woody. And so it creates a lot, like I personally never mind like eating something that's bolting. However, I don't sell them because for like arugula or mustard greens, for instance, all of the plants will have a noted sharpness that increases, or like what's the word that they usually use? Sharpness, no. Like I don't know, like a horseradish. I forget the spiciness. There we go. We'll have like the spiciness will grow exponentially. And so like I like that and I don't mind. Or a lot of people, what they'll do with their leaves, like especially mustard greens or arugula that is already in a hard flower like this one is, if you want to use them, you can always make them into sauce, knowing that it's going to be like a spicy like pesto or chimichurri or something. That's maybe parsley, but same concept. So that's something to keep in mind. So it is edible. It may not be saleable, but it is edible, and it's going to honestly depend on your specific tastes. I never, like spinach, for instance, I never have a problem eating bolted spinach. Matter of fact, I eat it all the time. But some people may not like the flavor. I like more of the natural flavors, so it just doesn't bother me. So you may be wondering, well, what plants are more likely to bolt? All of them. No, I'm kidding. I already talked about like lettuce, greens like arugula, any of the Asian greens, spinach, of course, any of the like cilantro is a big one. A lot of people struggle with growing cilantro, no problem growing coriander. Coriander is the seeds of the cilantro plant, if you didn't know that, by the way. Dill, I had mentioned. Basically any cool weather crop. It's it's when the seasons change or when there are changes and the plant's like, ooh, I don't know what's going on, but this phase of my life is going to be completing soon, and so I want to make sure and get that seed out there. And so that's why it happens. You might be wondering, well, what can I do? Nothing. No, I'm kidding. Well, but kind of not. There really isn't much you can do. The exception really is basil. If you have a basil plant, obviously this would be months from now, but if you have a basil plant and it's starting to form a flower stalk, you can absolutely snip off that flower stalk, especially caught in the earlier stages, and it'll just go back to producing more leaves, which is really excellent. However, the majority of other things like this arugula, if I cut off this flower stalk, it's just going to try and redo a flower stalk. It's not going to be like, oh, I'm just going to give up on procreating and become, arugula, delicious arugula greens producing plant. Like usually you can, what you do want to do though, is if you want to eat the leaves, is you do want to cut the stem, but that doesn't give you a lot of time. It just gives you a little bit of time, like a few days. So that way you can like mix up your menu a little bit and harvest the arugula and use it. It's still going to have a little bit of generally more of a sharper notes to the taste profile, but it's going to give you a little bit of time at least, because once that bolting action or flowering action has started, it's like a roller coaster and it goes really, really fast. So that's something to keep in mind. Again, basil's really the only one that'll do that. I mean, even like broccoli, for instance, which the broccoli is the flower, which is pretty interesting, just before it like opens up. But if you are growing broccoli, one thing you may or may not know, and this, I love this, but is if when you harvest the broccoli at its normal stage, when like how you see broccoli in the store or whatever, if you cut the broccoli off but leave the stem, like it'll actually send up side shoots, and they'll be smaller though, like the size of like 2 fingers or something like that. But you can actually have harvests after that, and those are great for like stir fry. They're just like basic like infant broccolis, and you know, and so because the broccoli plant itself is like, I'm gonna go to seed no matter what, and you know, of course we keep eating its seed, and eventually it'll just give up and die, or you'll cut it out, one of the two. But you know, unless you're going for broccoli seed, of course. But so as far as what are other things that you can do, and again, none of these will really stop it, but this is more in like the preparation phase, is you can select bolt resistant crops. Like for instance, on a farm, you don't grow, like if I grow spinach year round, I'm not growing the same type of spinach year round. I am going to grow a cold hardy spinach in the spring and for overwintering, and then a heat tolerant spinach in the summer. And so that's really important. Same thing like with cauliflowers, like they have, like I think snow is in a lot of the names of either the overwintering or cold hardy cauliflowers, like Snow King and stuff like that. However, though Snow King isn't going to do well in the summer, even in our mild summers. I guess the last summer, absolutely not, but other summers have been more mild. But so that actually rolls into the next thing, is selecting varieties that are bolt resistant and that are appropriate for your for what you're trying to grow them as or for. Because plants, they're smart. They're aware of the changing daylight hours. And for us in the Pacific Northwest, we know our summers and our springs, late springs, are just filled with daylight hours, right? We get so many. And for the plant, it knows that as they're increasing, it's like, well, at some point there's going to be a turn. And so again, it's preparing for its next generation. Another thing you could do is time your seedings correctly, both with the weather and succession. Meaning that starting arugula just before like August, that's going to be rough because August is our warmest month. And also knowing that arugula, for instance, I keep using my model, arugula will bolt, even in ideal circumstances, sometimes from like about 8 to 10 weeks in. And so if you have the ability to succession plan that so that you can harvest all you can and move on, you know, to each succession in that way, like if you're an arugula lover like myself, that's a really good option. Also, I think a lot of gardeners, when you grow something, especially if you're new, you're not scared to harvest it. I don't mean it like that, but like if you have a beautiful lettuce, it's so pretty to look at, but then when you cut it, then you lose that. And so I think there's like some apprehension in that. But the thing is that if you're not cutting it, then that's going to allow it to mature. And when it's mature, it's like, whoa, I'm done. Next phase of life. So don't be worried to go ahead and trim some of those leaves off, or do the cut and come again where you cut it just about an inch above the soil line, you know, and make sure you're harvesting it, because that'll help slow down its natural process. Another option too is to grow where cold, like crops that do better in cold weather, grow them in slightly shaded areas. I mean, obviously you can't grow them in like under thick trees or something, but like I'm in the back garden. In the front garden, I've got those row of cottonwoods, and so they provide like dappled shade. And so I noticed that my sensitive greens do way better over there in the middle of the day versus where I am right now and like there's no sun right now, a little bit, but during the summer on a hot day, I mean, everything's just gonna fry out here. Only things that love the heat are gonna do well. So those are kind of some preparation things that you can do. And I wanted to add one last note, is that depending obviously on how you have your garden set up and what you're going for and stuff like that, I would recommend a lot of times letting things go to seed. You don't have to let your whole area, but even just one plant. One, it's cool to watch. I love watching the bumblebees and all the pollinators, hummingbirds, whatever, kind of coming around. I love watching the plant grow big. I love the color of like the yellow or the white flowers. These ones have like little purple veins on the inside. I don't know if you can see it. I'll pick one for you. See, put it in my hand so you can see. It's really pretty. Oops. I don't know if you can see, but it's really pretty. And so I would recommend at least leaving one, especially if it's like carrot or something like that, because the umbrella shape is a great place for predatory insects to hang out, which actually talking about carrots going to seed reminds me of something I meant to say that I haven't said yet. And that's that some plants, so there's annual, right, which will just survive its till it goes to seed and dies, like 1 year. And there's biannual, which are considered 2 years, and I put air quotes because I'll get back to that. And then there's perennials, and those ones will last forever-ish. They're meant to continue on year after year, same plant. And so biannual technically means that they grow for 2 years and then go to seed. But the thing is about them is that what they do is warm, cold, warm, which is usually summer, winter, spring into summer, go to seed. But you can actually, it's very easy, especially if you tinker around with early starts like I do, is if you plant in like the middle of the winter or whatever, your probability of having carrots go to seed goes way up. You have carrots that don't, of course, but the colder it gets, like 2 years ago, I overwintered carrots that I planted, or for the last 2 years in December, the very first week of December, I planted a bunch of carrots. The first year, when I came into spring, I had about 4 out of like several hundred go to seed. And I left those because they were beautiful and I had all like the lace wings and stuff like that landing on them, and I just left them, and I did save the seed as like an emergency stock. But then this previous year, like this last December, I did the same thing, and I'm having like all of them go to seed. So that's kind of a bummer. But also we had a really cold winter, which explains that, of course. So when you have biannuals, and those are like your onions, your carrots, your beets, even though they're technically not supposed to go to seed until the second year, sometimes the weather conditions can present 2 years when it's really only been 1 year or half a year in the case of my carrots, because they were planted in December and they're starting to bolt now or middle of May. And so I'll have and I'll leave some, of course, and do the umbrella thing, and because I like them, I think it helps with the beneficial insects, and I think they're pretty. But so that's what I wanted to say about bolting and share with you. It is natural. Don't beat yourself up for it. If your plants are stressed, you're more likely, like I've seen a lot of people, if you start seeds inside, but either the watering isn't happening as frequently as they need, or they are not getting adequate light or something, and they're like, they give up on their life basically and go to seed right there when they're just teeny tiny little plants. And I mean, I've had that happen as well when I start some stuff in the greenhouse and it just gets too hot, and they're like, I give up, and they try and send up the tiniest little seed thing, and it's just like, okay, those are done. But anyways, sorry about bolting. It's okay. Happy gardening, and thank you for watching. Bye.